Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about shape design, how to use lines, how to use values, how to use all these sort of abstract concepts in art that you're probably taught in a beginner art class, whether it's in, high school or college or whatever. And they're going on about line and contrast and shapes and all this stuff, but they didn't ever actually explain how to use it and what you should use it for. So we're going to talk about all that and more, and how it relates to design, how the masters use it, how you should use it in your own paintings, etc., etc. It's going to be a fun time. We're mainly going to be focusing on artist John Singer Sargent because he had an amazing sense of design and values and, all that other stuff. So let's just get right into it. So the main point that I'm going to be talking about today is a subject and how to use these abstract principles to supplement a subject. So let's review some of the abstract kind of terminology here. So we all know what line is. Those are lines, right? This is a line. This is a line. I'm sure you get the sense of what it is now. I'm sure you already knew. And let's also talk about shapes. So a shape is just an enclosed line. That's really all it is. If I took this and I filled it out, that's a circle. Took this, that's a triangle, right? So lines create shapes, and then what do shapes create? Well, that looks like a shape, right? That looks like a shape. That looks like a shape too. Well, what happens when we connect them all? What do we get? Well, we get form, right? This looks more three-dimensional, but really what it is it's a bunch of lines put together that make shapes, and then those shapes create form. So it's important to think about things three-dimensionally, but also at the same time, it's important to think about things two-dimensionally. How you're using your shapes in your composition make or break how it's going to be viewed and judged by you and others unconsciously. So if we look at different types of shapes, we can start to see certain patterns emerging for what we prefer and what things suggest. So what we always prefer is simplicity. You need simplicity in your shape design. And what you also need is some sort of purpose or point. Okay, so that sounds all very abstract. Let's put it into examples, right? That's a very ugly shape. And I went over this in my other video, but it's so pertinent here, I'm gonna go back over it again. That's a much more attractive shape. That's just much more visually appealing to look at. This looks ugly, that looks better. And why? Well, it has some simplicity, but it also has purpose. So what do I mean by purpose or point? This is telling me something. Whether you know it consciously or not isn't really important as far as enjoying art goes. But if you're going to be designing pictures, you really need to understand this point. So this feels like it has a direction, if you notice that. And the reason why it has a direction is because it tapers. So you can use tapering to suggest flow. If you look at this creates some sense of flow. It looks like, you should be looking over here. Looks like whatever's going on over here is probably interesting, right? And this really, really simple concept is how a lot of master painters create beautiful compositions where you feel emotionally connected to it. And you don't really know why, but this is really what's going on abstractly. So if we take what we just learned there with simplicity and purpose, which is essentially flow and, guiding the viewer where to look, you'll see some of the patterns emerge. So if you ignore the subject matter completely, doesn't matter if this is a girl, this is a fish, this is a rock, it doesn't matter. It's still values, shapes, edges, lines, etc. It's all those art terms. And what you see here is a very simple shape design. Boom. And, that's obviously very abstract representation. But what happens here is that your eye is led upwards to the face, right? Your eye isn't led down to the feet or whatever, because what's important is the subject, the face. And you should be using the way that you're designing shapes to always subconsciously suggest to your viewers where to look. So I did a study actually of a little cropped part of this painting, and this is going to be a little reflective because it's in plastic, but it illustrates the point well enough, so I'm going to bring it out. Let's see. Here it is. All right, so we see here the same sort of concepts that I was just talking about. Not only was it in that other girl on the left, if you remember, but it's on the little girl as well. So right here, you can feel all the energy get pushed into her face. And imagine if Sargent had instead drawn it like, let's think about it. If Sargent had drawn a little girl, let's say, or, you know, whatever, with their arms out here, and then, like, you know, some, like, this is really shitty, but you can get my point, right? Your attention and your direction is all down there to the feet. It's not up to, you know, the face or whatever. And what he's doing here is that he's directing your attention towards the face. And the way that he's doing that is through purpose, which is the flow and the lines and the shapes that we just talked about. But it's also with the point, right? Or with the simplicity, right? If these shapes were really, really complex, you would still kind of get what he's talking about, but it would be like somebody mumbling when they're talking. You know, you can kind of understand what they're saying, what they're getting to, but it's just a lot more obscure, and it's really confusing to listen to because you know you can't really make out some of the words or whatever. Like if you can see this entire thing right here is a really, really simple shape. You know, that entire sleeve is no more complex than it needs to be, right? If he had added in every single little fold and nook and cranny and, like, you know, added in a ton of values and all this sort of stuff, a lot of, you know, and it started looking patchy, and it might have looked more realistic depending on how he did it, right? Realistic, but it would have gained visual ambiguity. You wouldn't be as sure about what he was getting at, because suddenly if he had done that with the sleeve, this sleeve would have more visual importance than the face. And suddenly the subject is the sleeve. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we've gone over some of how he, oh, this is a good example of simplicity, by the way. So I did this with pan pastel, and you can see that it's literally made out of two shapes. And this creates a much stronger composition than if I had added in a lot of unnecessary detail, you know? I did a self-portrait, in fact, and it has an extremely simple shape design as well. And it feels just more visually, you know, appealing than if I had added in a ton of extra detail that was unnecessary. If I'd added in every single stitch and, you know, crease and everything that I had seen, then it would detract from the focus. And that's really what we're getting at here. But anyway, so we've gone over line and we've gone over shape and all this sort of stuff. A really, really crucial thing is values. And values also make or break your painting. All these things are important, but values is right, you know, if you made a hierarchy of importance in art, values are of the utmost important, so much more profoundly important than color. You could ask any professional working artist who actually knew their stuff and they maybe made beautiful art and they have a good sense of design, and they do, if they make beautiful art, they will tell you that values are extremely important, much more important than color. So what do I mean by values? Values is just very, very simply light to dark. All right, you got really dark on this end, and then you got really light on that end, right? Now, the way that you actually use your values makes or breaks your painting. So when I'm talking about design, design is associated with this. So if, let's say we had a value scale in a painting, right? Like this one. We have really, really darks, and then we have really, really brights. But if Sargent had done this and he used his values scattered all over the place and he wasn't really simplifying the value spectrum, then it would also feel more ambiguous. So I know that that probably didn't make a whole lot of sense, but what that visually means is that what he was doing is that he was separating his values. He only used like 3 values in this painting. And there's obviously more subtleties, you know, when you like soften an edge, that create more values. But when you limit yourself to only a few values, you know, you have your dark, dark, light, light, and then your midtone, it feels better. It looks better, you know. And when I say it feels better, it looks better. That's what I mean. Here he has a really, really dark shape that makes up almost the entire composition. And then he has his light shapes, and then he has his midtones. It doesn't feel like there's like 7 million values in here. It's all really, 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 you know, compressed. That's what he was doing. And he did this all the time. I mean, look at this Beatrice. This is a little girl. If you squint your eyes, and that's the way that you can see values a little bit clearer, you see a really, really dark, really, really light, and then some midtones. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of stuff going on, because there's not, you know, and the simplicity is really what matters there. So when you're painting, you'll notice that the things that make it easier to paint, like compressing your values, squinting and all that sort of stuff, will actually make it look better at the end of the day. Like the easiest, I think the best paintings that I've ever done, speaking from my own experience, have always been the easiest ones to paint. And the reason for that is that if it's easy to paint, then it's simple, and simplicity looks more beautiful. You know, like the one I was talking about earlier, this cat, I knocked that out in 15 minutes, and I posted it to my Instagram, and it's the most liked picture I've ever posted. And I did knock it out in 15 minutes. I spent 120 hours on other projects, on much more detailed projects, and they just did not perform as well. And it's because subconsciously we prefer simplicity, you know. Another example of simplicity with your value arrangements is, let's see, right here. This is another one of the more popular ones on my Instagram. And I mean, anybody who's ever seen my art has always told me that this is their favorite. And I think the reason for that is because the values are so compressed. You have your really, really bright values, and they're just saved for one part of the composition because it just draws so much attention. And then the rest of it is really, really dark. And, you know, if this would be really, really easy to draw. Simply, right? If you have, let me do this off screen, I'm going to pull it on. But, let's see. Okay, so really, really fast. This is basically what's going on. And I can do this simplification here. Because it's so compressed, right? It feels like there's light, 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 and then there's dark. But if you have something that's, let's say, far more varied, detailed, whatever you want to call it, let's see if we can find something. Okay, this is a great example. This just feels like, what the hell is going on? You know, like there's so much visual information. There's values all over the place. There's lights, there's darks, you know, like the entire value spectrum is here. And what that does is that it adds more ambiguity because there's no point, really. You know, you could say like this is technically okay. You know, it has good perspective. Feels like there's volume and there's form and all that sort of stuff. But there's no point. And the reason for that is that the lines, generally speaking, kind of go nowhere. You know, like your eye here is pulled in this direction because we talked about shapes earlier, right? It's pulled in this, but then now it's going over here, you know, now it's going down. It's just like your eye is just all over the place. It has no idea what's going on. And then the values, which is what we were talking about, if you squint your eyes, like it's not grouped together really well. And you'll see really good paintings group the values really well. There's a light section, there's a dark section, and there's not like 40 million lights and dark sections. You know, like in this painting, dark, light, midtones. This painting, dark, lights, midtones. This is a midtone shape. This is a dark shape. These are some light shapes. but it's kept to like 4, you know, there's like 6 big shapes in this entire image, you know? And when you can get it that simple, it looks so much better. You can see like, so a lot of people don't like Sargent's watercolors. And the reason for that is that I don't think he knew really consciously maybe what he was doing so well back here. He might have, but when he started doing landscapes, there's a lot of written records that what he would do is that he would just walk outside and he'd plant his canvas down and then he'd just start painting. You know, he tried to make it as random as possible. And because he put no prior thought into what he was going to paint, the values in his watercolors seem like a little less cool. You know, like I'd rather stare at this for hours and hours and days than that. Even though there's actually about similar detail. It's just that this is, like, if you squint your eyes here, it's not really compressed very well. There's just like a dark, it's kind of basically all the same value. You know, there's a light sky, but like, it just, he's not using the whole value spectrum, and honestly, the shapes are like going all over the place. It feels like there's no subject. Yeah. I mean, here's another one. Sargent had such a weird sense of composition, and people criticized him a lot for this. So this one, people criticized to hell, and that's because the cropping is just so weird. Your eye is drawn in 2 different positions here. Like, it's mostly drawn here, because if you squint your eyes, like, this is the brightest spot on the page. But he has, like, this woman over here crammed in the corner. And he's not, like, there's just no direction. You know, you're kind of confused. She's cut off. The sense of design here is extremely poor. And that's why it was criticized to hell. And then he eventually, this is Soroy, this isn't even Sargent. He eventually got a lot better at composition once he started studying older artists. Like, so this is actually Sargent's study of Las Menas by Velázquez. And he probably studied that because Carolus Duran told him to. But you can see after he started studying this, it directly kind of related to his paintings here. You can see that he's clumping values a little bit better. You know, there's this really dark shape that's clumped. There's a really light shape that's clumped. And it feels simpler. You know, doesn't matter what you go to. This is a perfect example. He simplified this thing down to like 2 values. Dark and light. You know, there is midtones in the background, to be fair. But, you know, like, it's really hard to make something this simple. But if you can do it, it looks way, way better. You know? This, for example, too. This is so obvious what the point is. It's his face, you know? Like, the hands supplement the main subject, and you always want the background and other elements to supplement the subject because it makes it more interesting. But you never want it to overpower it. And he does this. This is a beautiful portrait because of that. Everything just kind of leads to the face. And that's because if you squint your eyes, it's like this big white blob in a sea of darkness. And then also, you can't really even see the edge of his coat here. And that's another thing masters do, is that in the darks, they like soften a lot of the edges. And they merge the shapes, because of the reason I was talking about earlier. Merging shapes makes it simpler. But you can see the same concepts here again and again. You know, everything is just leading to the face. The values are just so well done. Here's some studies I think he did. Here's a really good example. It's the same sort of tapering effect. Did this a lot. I think this is actually a study he did, so that might have been another artist. But I mean, all the great artists use that technique. So, you know, you can see same thing, same technique, taper right in here. And then you can see, like, you want to really think about where you're leading the viewer. Where is he leading the viewer here? Up to the face and out through the arm. And what does that give? It gives, like, makes it seem like this woman is really important, but what's really important here is the motion. Like, so you subconsciously think, like, you know, what is she doing? Well, she's dancing. And that's kind of the point of the image, you know. It's not a portrait, it's a dancer. And what this gives is that, it's called a Spanish dancer. And you can see abstractly here, he's actually representing the dance through his shape design. If he had this woman's hand, like, down by her side like this, then it'd seem much more like a portrait. But this, where it leads out like that, gives, you know, it makes you subconsciously understand what he was trying to literally say. And if you can subconsciously expand on an idea through visual art, then people really connect to that. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this. It's a really, really deep, heavy topic that I could talk about for hours. And I mean, once you start seeing how these great painters design paintings, you're never going to be able to unsee it. And that's a good thing. It's really important to bring into your own work and your own designs, and to think about things at an abstract level while making it representational is extremely difficult, but it's also very rewarding, and it'll lead you to great places. So anyway, I hope you guys learned something. Have a great day.